Good.
Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or so, and then we'll commence the meeting. Okay, great. I think we are at 11 o'clock now, so we'll just make a start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the call. Greetings from London. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the CTO Transformation Centre Stage, hosted in partnership with the United Kingdom. My name is Roberta Wiafe. I work at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and I will be the Master of Ceremony for today. Just so we know where everyone's dialing in from and to have a bit of interaction, I wonder if you could put where you're calling from and your name in the chat. Thank you. So to kick things off, I'll hand over to Leonard Abonyo for the CTO commencement song. Thank you, Leonard.
God, we would lift our eyes to the hills. CTO's help is coming from you. Your peace you give us in time of the storm. You are the source of our strength. You are the strength of our life. We lift our hands in total praise to you.
Thank you, Leonard. Just to reflect on who we've got on the line, we've got people from all over the Commonwealth, which is great to see. I can see Ghana, Grenada, Gibraltar, Cayman Islands, Cameroon, Nigeria. Hello to everyone. Welcome. It's great to have you here today. So I will now hand over to the CTO Secretary General, Bernadette Lewis, for the welcome address.
Thank you very much, Bobby. And I stand on the protocols already established. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of our Digital Transformation Centre Stage. This is the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization's flagship showcase, celebrating the successes of our members in digital transformation. And this platform is designed to foster collaboration, to share best practices, and to ensure that no Commonwealth member is left behind as we navigate the evolving digital landscape together. Now, today, The 5th of November holds enduring significance in the history of the United Kingdom. It marks the anniversary of the 1605 gunpowder plot when Guy Fawkes and his fellow conspirators attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament and assassinate King James I. It was a dramatic moment in the struggle between authority and dissent, the government and bad actors. Now, fast forward 400 years to the present. King Charles III sits on the throne, and we find ourselves in the midst of a technological revolution. We are dealing with climate change, geopolitical tensions, and the digital disruptions that are reshaping our world. And the governance frameworks that may have served us from 1605 through the last century are now being tested. Some of those frameworks have been rendered obsolete by the rapid evolution of digital technologies. And unlike the limited reach of Guy Fawkes, today's bad actors possess tools that can have a global impact and unprecedented scale. So against this backdrop, I am delighted to welcome our member, the United Kingdom, to the spotlight of our Digital Transformation Center Stage webinar. Their team will share the transformative reforms undertaken for digital service delivery and offer valuable perspectives into how artificial intelligence is reshaping the public sector in the United Kingdom. And their experience stands as a testament to how modern governments can adapt, innovate, and safeguard democratic institutions in an age of uncertainty and deep complexity. So let us listen, learn, and be inspired. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General, for your kind words. We were really pleased to be invited by the CTO to share our experience in the UK, and I'd really like to thank the Secretary General and her team for organising this fantastic event. The CTO does such a great job of supporting Commonwealth countries to learn from one another's experiences and share best practice. The report on digital transformation is a fantastic example of this. It had some really useful examples of best practice and learning from across the Commonwealth. Events such as Digital Week in Gibraltar and the recent Development Day have also been great platforms of learning. We're really happy to share our experiences with everyone on the call today on AI in the public sector and gov.uk. We really look forward to continuing to work together on digital transformation and sustainable development. So I will now hand over to our first speaker, Joy T. Basita, Deputy Director for Strategy, Insights and Programme for gov.uk. Just a bit of background about Joy T. She's worked on a range of initiatives such as digital identity, data sharing, payments and notifications. Prior to joining the civil service, she worked in digital product development in the private sector, specifically in media and publishing. Today, she will be sharing the UK's experience of government digital service reform. Over to you, Joy T.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Just bear with me whilst we get the text sorted out, and I've got some slides to share as well, and then I'll kick off. Sorry for the delay there. We're just trying to get some slides shared. I'm here with my colleague Bailey, who's going to try and get those up and running. In the meantime, I'll just introduce myself. Thank you so much for the generous welcome. My name is Jyoti Basuta. I work at the Government Digital Service in the UK government. I work on gov.uk, which I hope some of you will be familiar with. And today I'm going to talk you through a bit of background about the work we do on gov.uk, where we've come from, how we operate. I'm going to show a couple of examples of the work that we're doing at the moment. And I'm going to talk you through some of the new developments that we're working towards and the future direction for public services in the UK. And hopefully that will be accompanied by some visual stimulation if we can get that working in the background as well. Great. So to start off with, I'll just give a bit of background about gov.uk, which is the single brand for the government, UK government information in the UK. The sort of story started in about 2010 when there was an independent review of digital across government in the UK. And at that time, the picture was quite different. There were actually thousands of websites managed by different parts of government, different departments, different teams. And you can imagine from a user's perspective, that was a very kind of confusing, potentially duplicative experience that they had. And from a government's perspective as well, there was a lot of repeated effort in different parts of the system. So the report that's on screen at the moment is just a screenshot really from the, I'd say, really kind of fundamental shift that was advocated for in the this independent review at the time. It basically said that we needed to make it simpler for users to interact with government and complete services without needing to understand how government was structured. And with this report, the sort of idea for a sort of single, coherent, consistent place for services and guidance from the government was really born. And that's really the origin story of GDS, the Government Digital Service, which was established shortly after this review. And its purpose was to make digital government simple, clearer and faster for everyone. So GDS was established at the centre of the UK government. And its role was really to work across the system as a whole to drive consistency and coherence to improve those sort of outcomes for users and for government. And really the first kind of product for this newly formed government digital service was gov.uk. And you can see on the screen here some screenshots of sort of early prototypes of that was being developed. The idea was having a unified place to find government information and services and to show that the improvement that we could make. As you might imagine, there was quite a bit of skepticism, of change that needed to be delivered across the government system in order to reach this goal. And that role of GDS really at the centre and with a strong sort of level of political support and mandate to operate across the system was really important in achieving that sort of coherence and unification. So fast forward a couple of years, gov.uk launched in 2012. At that point, it consolidated about 2,000 different government sort of digital offers and websites and replacing them with a single thing. And crucially, you know, this single place is all under a sort of consistent and coherent government brand. I'll talk a bit more about this later. It's actually made up of multiple different domains, and we work in collaboration with departments to deliver this experience. But it's all about having consistency and coherence and maintaining users' trust. Something that the Secretary General talked about being, you know, really under threat in this type of day and age. So developing that sort of instantly recognizable design language. You'll see on the screen here some of the influences that we drew on to increase trust amongst users was really crucial to making this a success. So gov.uk now is is really an essential part of living and working, studying, doing business in the UK. It is the sort of digital home of the UK government, supports about 88 million visits on average per month. And that's just those users who we can track who've consented to cookies. It's grown to over 800,000 pages of content. That's rather more than I think we would like. About 80%, according to our quarterly polling, are satisfied with their experience of gov.uk. And we also report quite high levels of trust amongst users, which is something we really, really rely on to be able to deliver services. And gov.uk is, in the UK at least, as recognisable as some really huge digital brands. You'll see a screenshot of some YouGov polling that they carry out on this screen. It consistently ranks along brands like Spotify, for example, certain Google services, Amazon, etc. So just to go into a bit more detail about how we actually operate gov.uk, I've mentioned that the Government Digital Service sort of sits at the centre of government. This sort of digital centre exists to serve departments and the wider public sector. And the way in which we do that across our colleagues across government is in a sort of federated model. So GDS at the centre provides gov.uk's front end channels. We provide service components and platforms. Meanwhile, teams across government in different departments are responsible for managing services and most of the content which forms part of gov.uk as well. So there's this kind of federated sort of model across government means that we have to really put a lot of effort into thinking about how we can maintain sort of coherence and consistency across the system. We aren't directly controlling and managing at the centre. It happens in partnership. I'll talk a bit about some of the ways that we do that. One is something we call the gov.uk proposition. It's essentially a policy and an assurance process around that, which really defines what gov.uk is, what it's for, what should be part of it. And this is backed up essentially by a mandate across government that says that different departments and services need to adhere to the gov.uk proposition, and we have sort of governance across departments to enforce this. Crucially, this sort of policy really describes what should not be part of gov.uk, what we currently consider to be out and that shouldn't come under the gov.uk brand or the website, and that we would expect to sit elsewhere. So this is a really important lever for us, really maintaining the sort of trust and unity of the gov.uk domain. We also provide other standards and guidance for departments, again, to try to drive that coherence across the system. Things like the service standard, which is also assured by Government Digital Service and departments. If you are building or maintaining a public service that is part of the gov.uk sort of suite, it must meet certain quality standards, as well as a technology code of practice as well. And then finally, we also provide service components, technical components that departments can use to create consistent, interoperable services and experiences within sort of gov.uk suite. There's some screenshots on this slide from the design system. That is essentially a collection of front-end patterned, reusable code that can be reused across government to build those consistent services. Just a couple of examples of some of the pages that exist on gov.uk at the moment. These are some of our travel advice pages, all from Commonwealth nations, you'll notice. And we publish these in partnership with FCDO. These are some of the most popular content pages on gov.uk, and it used to communicate advice to people about travelling to different countries. This next slide shows some work that we've done recently with number 10 Downing Street to showcase the Prime Minister's plans for change, which sets out the kind of milestones for government that it aims to reach by the end of the current Parliament. So far so good, and we are really proud of having this sort of consistent and coherent experience across government. But people's expectations are changing, and yeah, the Secretary General spoke really clearly about some of those shifts. More than a quarter of people in the UK now would rather watch or listen to things like news and information consumption rather than reading it, and that's an effect which is particularly prominent amongst younger groups. Compared to 2012, we see most of the visits to gov.uk being made by mobile. That was just 13% when we launched it. It's now over 60%. And we're also seeing increased use of things like AI, off-platform search, large language models for people to access and understand information in their own terms. So the context around us has really changed. The ambition, this sort of restated ambition for kind of modern, satisfying digital public services in the UK has been set in a recent announcement and policy launch earlier this year, the Blueprint for Modern Digital Government. And really this sets an ambition for us to be much more proactive, personal, and joined up in the public services that we provide to meet changing users' expectations, and ultimately to maintain that relationship between the citizen and the state. So what does that mean that we're working towards now? Well, what's changing? You know, we are moving from a series of, you know, infrequent or disconnected transactions that people might have with government to something which is an increasingly kind of persistent and personalized relationship. We want to move towards services which are kind of smarter, that they're more context aware, that they nudge you to action, and they're more proactive. We want to make sure that there are increasingly kind of automated and frictionless services, both on and offline. At the moment, we're still in a situation where things might be semi-digitized or part paper or part digital. So there are more opportunities across the sort of end-to-end for us to sort of automate and transform those journeys. Gov.uk is at the moment quite a formal proposition. It's quite text heavy, and we've got evidence to suggest it could be daunting for some people. So we're moving from the existing website and brand to something which is more multi-format, multi-channel, and that responds to people in ways that they want to engage. And overall, moving from, I guess, what's been more of a passive role about the best place to come to find information or services from the government to something which is much more active, helping people to make things happen. So the major shift that we've made, or one of the major shifts that we've made, is that gov.uk is now multi-channel. So we have moved from a world in which gov.uk is a website, that's mostly what I've talked about in terms of the history and background of gov.uk, to something which is meeting users where they are and providing a more varied way of interacting with government. So you'll see on this slide, I'll go into detail on some of these in a little more detail, the range of channels that we are now offering for people to access trusted government information, from search and social channels, which are off-platform, things like Google, or increasingly with large language models. The website continues to be our biggest and a really, really important channel for us, our sort of universal channel, if you will. AI chat, which we have been doing quite a bit of experimentation with, and we think offers a real opportunity for people to get information in language that they really kind of understand, without having to interpret for themselves from some sort of static and impersonal information on the website. And finally, the gov.uk app, which is really our more personalised channel, and mobile first. So to take these in turn, we have expanded onto off-platform channels like gov.uk social. So this means using our kind of trusted brand and identity in, you know, places like Instagram or Facebook, the places where we know that our users already are. And really, this is aiming to broaden the reach and relevance of gov.uk, particularly amongst new or underserved audiences, those who might not engage with the website, for example, younger users. And we're finding this is an increasingly kind of prevalent and consistent presence in our users' experience. This also extends to working with other off-platform sort of search or informational services through things like Google. Most of our users on gov.uk are coming from a Google search, and in many instances we can serve up that trusted information without them having to come to the website at all. That's a good outcome as far as we're concerned. So trying to improve the way in which our content can be consumed by other parties is part of this sort of broader plan. The gov.uk app, this is really a kind of significant shift for us. It's giving people a more personalised and proactive experience of government information and services. This includes things like the ability to send things like push notifications. Users will sign into the app, and that allows us to provide a more persistent experience than has been possible on the gov.uk website. I'll talk a bit more about the kind of sign-in and identity components of that in a moment. But yeah, this is really where we are looking to develop a much more kind of personalised and proactive experience, building on the universal channel that is the gov.uk website. And then just finally on these new channels, gov.uk chat. So this is a sort of AI-powered tool that uses gov.uk content, trusted, accurate content, as the basis of responding to users' queries in natural language. And we're testing that at the moment, really with the aim of providing the public with accurate, quick answers to their questions, but which is still based on a trusted source. So these new channels are really enabled by new capabilities that we are building sort of behind the scenes. And gov.uk One login is a major enabler, especially for the gov.uk app, because historically people interacting with the UK government have had to have lots of different accounts or sign-in methods to access services, and gov.uk One login is really a transformational digital program in the UK, which aims to basically remove that duplication by bringing government accounts into a sort of single and secure place. That is really crucial for something like an app experience, which people expect to be really personalised. We need to know who you are and to recognise you coming back again. So without having really laid the groundwork with One login, I just don't think it would be possible for us to make the kind of headway that we have done on the gov.uk app. It also allows us to do things like digital credentials. Once we know who you are, we can recognise you returning. We have developed a digital credential and wallet functionality. So this basically allows people to securely store government issued documents on their smartphones and to use them easily when they're needed. We've just recently launched the first of these digital credentials, which is the Veterans Card in the UK. That basically is issued to service people, former service people, and allows them to demonstrate proof of their service in contexts that they might need to. And over time, we're looking at expanding this set of credentials, most notably with a digital driving licence in the UK. And all of this is really underpinned by a more flexible, multi-channel brand identity. I talked earlier about like the need for us to maintain consistency and coherence across an experience. That was certainly the case when we were just running a website. Now we're running a wider variety of channels and experiences. So making sure that those those standards, the guidance, in this case brand guidelines, are really fit for purpose across that really expanded proposition is an important component of making this a success. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the journey that we've been on, some of the priorities that we're working towards in the UK context. And yeah, I'm really happy to take any questions now. I've also, on this next slide, got my email address in case you'd like to get in touch directly for more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for that really engaging presentation. It was so interesting to hear the origins of gov.uk, as well as plans for future transformation projects. So right now we'll take some questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please can you drop them in the chat, and then maybe we'll take them in bundles of 2 or so. But to kick things off, I'm going to ask a question. So I was wondering if you could share any lessons learned from the process of setting up gov.uk and creating that trust with users.
So on the process of setting up gov.uk, I talked a bit about moving from what was quite sort of fragmented cross-government picture to something which is much more unified. And I think that in the UK's context, having a high degree of kind of political support to drive that coherence across government was really important. The position of the government digital service that was leading this work at the sort of centre of government at the time, it was close to, I guess, the sort of centre of power and to things like the Prime Minister's office, I think was a really enabling factor that allowed us to drive that change. And really having the teeth around the sorts of standards and mandates that we needed the whole of government to work towards, I think really sort of helped to drive that transformation. In terms of users' trust, in the original kind of design or conception of gov.uk, there was a lot of work done into how we could build on existing sort of signifiers of trust to create something which is, it gives people a sense of it being official, of it being authoritative, trustworthy. And that's something that sort of consistently in some of our own research, we find that our sort of brand identity, I suppose, performs strongly. There's also then, I guess, about the actual content and substance of the services themselves. We have systems in place to assure the quality of content, the accuracy of the content, and really we sort of live or die based on those things being effective and people being able to trust those. So it's a mixture of people's perceptions and trying to make sure that we're driving those, and also then in the experience side of things, the actual content and services themselves, and making sure that they're as effective as possible. I think really interestingly, that's an area where things have probably changed quite a bit recently. We've got the way in which people consume information has changed, going to other sources rather than coming directly to us. How do we manage that to make sure that people can still access trusted information? Things like AI, which obviously have the ability to hallucinate. No matter how good your training is, that's always a risk. And also in terms of users' perceptions, we found when we looked at our sort of identity a couple of years or a year ago now, that whilst people perceived gov.uk as being authoritative and official, particularly amongst certain groups, it was also perceived as being overly formal or dense or even judgmental. So you'll see in some of those later designs I showed you, we're trying to kind of warm up gov.uk slightly, particularly in some of these new channels like the app or like the social, where people have very different expectations of what you might want from a website. It would frankly be odd if we were to just replicate exactly the same way of doing things on the website as in the social space, where we have to stand out, we're talking to different people. So yeah, we're on that journey still.
Thank you so much. Fascinating, especially kind of the different tones for the different platform. Just to come to the chat, we've had a few questions. So let me see. Timothy Ringsdore asks, what is the biggest challenge you have faced? Does the platform allow one login to access any government services? And then there is a question from Prisa in Lowedim. Is this accessible everywhere? To be precise, Nigeria. Thank
you. So the first question was biggest challenges, and the second question was, the second part of it was around, can one login be used to access any service? Not yet is the answer to that second part of it. We are basically onboarding different departments and services across government onto one login, and we haven't completed that yet. So I think we are at about, I want to say 200 services, I'm looking at my colleague, that are currently integrated with one login. And there's a whole kind of roadmap of onboarding additional departments and services, but the goal is absolutely to have that basically coverage across all government services. In terms of biggest challenges, I mean, I'm repeating myself here, but I think it really is about how you can basically drive coherence and consistency across different departments when, you know, the drivers for different service teams, you know, if you're in tax or if you're in benefits, you've got different sorts of users, different political drivers, different policy priorities, for instance. So this kind of horizontal cross-government working through things like guidance, standards, governance, I think is really critical to be able to achieve this, because, you know, we're not in a context in which we can control and deliver all of those things centrally. You know, this is a kind of federated way of working, so we have to get that right. Otherwise, you might be in a situation where, okay, the bits that we run and own are, you know, might be great, but there's a lot of inconsistency in other parts of the experience, which doesn't add up to a sort of satisfying experience overall. So I think that's probably the one that I'd call out. Yeah, I think the one login and sort of digital identity part of this as well has definitely been challenging, and yeah, the sort of the enabling effect of that is really, really powerful, but it's been a really difficult problem to solve in the UK.
Thank you, Jyoti. And there was a question about whether, I guess, gov.uk was available and accessible in Nigeria.
Yes, absolutely. So please do go and have a look. So, you know, I don't know off the top of my head what proportion of our users are based in different countries, but you know, it's a substantial amount, because particularly for content or services around things like visas, immigration, travel, business, trade, this is all part of the single kind of gov.uk proposition. So it's available, absolutely available in different countries. Some of the things I've talked about as well, tools like the design system, the front end code. We also make these things open source. So for teams in other contexts, you can totally have a look at or rip off some of the code on our government GitHub account as well.
Thank you, Jyoti. Lots of questions coming through, both in the chat and in the Q&A function. So I'll give you two more. One is from Aranola. She asks, how does each ministry of the government manage their services and web pages? Or is there a central management service point? And then the second question is from Asen, who asks, could you tell us a bit more on how GDS manages and develops data interoperability and data governance? So two small questions, just joking, they're not small.
Okay, so on the first question, there is no central management system, essentially. So I'll take them slightly separately, because the content and information we handle slightly differently to some of the services. So for the content and information that we make available to the public, what we do is, for basically the most popular content on gov.uk, the stuff which is used more than any others, it represents only about 1% of pages, but accounts for, this is not quite accurate, something like 90%, for example, of the traffic to these particular pages. And it's about things like benefits information, tax information, driving information, really, really popular stuff. We basically do centrally manage that information directly within the government digital service, but we do it in partnership with the responsible ministry, who is basically the kind of policy expert, and they basically agree and sign off on the accuracy of that content. That we sort of devote specific resources to making sure that it is designed in the most user-centered way that we possibly can. For the remainder of the content on gov.uk, which is maybe more like 98 or 99%, that is basically fully devolved to ministries to manage themselves. And to support them to do that, we provide them with centralized publishing tools, like a sort of a CMS, which they can use in order to get information onto gov.uk. And we also provide things like guidance, standards, training, even, to support them to do that in a way which is as consistent and high quality as possible. I mentioned before, you know, we're now at over 800,000 pages on gov.uk. Like, the content estate has really grown very significantly, and that brings its own challenges in terms of managing it, keeping it up to date. We're really interested actually in trying to reduce the size of the content base to make that task simpler, but also we think that might help in terms of things like, large language models and so on, improving the quality and accuracy of the content that you've got and keeping that as focused as possible, we think will help to produce better answers. When it comes to services then, those are basically all delegated to different ministries, but we do put some guardrails around those services. So I guess by services, I'm talking about, applying for benefits, applying for a visa, these sort of transactional type services. We set basically standards that have to be met in terms of how the service is developed, and the performance of those services. And we, from the centre, in partnership with departments, assure services against those standards. And we also control the domains that we delegate for those services to be hosted on. So we will only grant you a domain for your service in a ministry if you can demonstrate that you have met those standards. As well as, I mentioned earlier, providing components that can basically be reused by service teams. That helps to drive consistency and interoperability, and hopefully means that we've kind of once done the hard work to make sure that something is good quality and consistent and so on, and then it can just be repurposed elsewhere by different teams at no or low cost for their ministries. So that's kind of how it works in terms of content and services with the departments. In terms of the second question was about data sharing, I think, across government. So at the moment, this happens in quite a fragmented way, I would say. So there might be relationships between individual departments where they have formed agreements and they have set up mechanisms or infrastructure to share data with one another, but there is not a consistent there's not a consistent scaled approach across all government departments. And that's one of these major enablers for us, basically, in terms of the future sort of direction that I talked about. And we see one login as really the groundwork, or the fundamental groundwork, for us to be able to do that, because it's a big challenge at the moment that we each, in different parts of government, have different ways of recognizing or identifying users. So you might have, John Smith over here in the health ministry, and they've got a separate record over here in the benefits ministry, except it's spelt John Smith with a Y rather than John Smith with an I. So the idea of having actually a single way for people to identify themselves with government, we see as like really a big step towards being able to connect securely and in a privacy sort of centric way, but be able, with the users, likely with the user's consent, to allow them to reuse information that they have already provided to government. Because we hear it quite a lot in research, that people are like, I've already told you this, don't you already know this about me? And it's like, well, that department might know, but we actually don't know over here. So the One Login program is definitely a big enabler for a more sophisticated use of personal data.
Thank you, Joyce. We're coming to the end of the time for this presentation, so I'll just put two more questions to you. There's a lot of engagement in the chat, so apologies for the questions that I didn't manage to get to. So this is from Seetler, who asks, what was your digital inclusion plan looking at the elderly and those with little digital literacy skills? And then a final question from Irasima. What was the single most impactful moment or project in your experience, and why did it stand out?
These are great questions. So the first question was about digital inclusion. Yeah, because our ambition is to be for everyone. Like, in my opinion, it's sort of, that can be quite an overwhelming place to start, right? Because it's not as if we're kind of focused on one particular segment of the addressable market, as it were, for people. We have to find solutions that have as broad sort of usability as possible across the basically the entire population and potentially beyond. So that is our ambition. I would say, like, one of the major drivers around this shift that we've been making towards something which is more multi-channel and more varied is in response to some evidence that we've got about the success of gov.uk amongst different groups. So, for example, I mentioned some polling that we carry out. that overall levels of things like trust and satisfaction are pretty high. But if you break that down by certain groups, for example, you find that actually that positive experience is not equally sort of distributed. So particularly for younger users, we can more or less say that like the younger you are, the worse your level of satisfaction is with gov.uk as it currently stands. And we, I guess, have correlated that to the idea that actually younger people like don't tend to use websites. The tone in which we're providing the information is really jarring when you haven't had an experience like that before, or your other digital interactions are very, very different. So some of the work that we're doing, for example, in the social space is directly trying to address some of the limitations that we've got at the moment. I think there are a couple of specific examples around elderly people and digital literacy. Satisfaction levels with gov.uk amongst older groups are actually some of the strongest. So, for example, amongst the over 75s even, and some of the experience in the UK elsewhere in the health sector, I know that take up of things like the NHS, which is our like health service digital app, which is sort of outside the scope of gov.uk, has been particularly successful amongst older groups. So that might not be quite what you expect from a conversation about digital services, but the kind of proposition that we've got at the moment seems to be performing relatively well. In terms of digital literacy, the content design team and standards and guidance I mentioned earlier are really intended to try to ensure that even someone with a low level of digital literacy can understand the information which is on gov.uk. And we see one of the advantages of things like, for example, chat tools being that people can like interrogate or ask him questions about the information in a much more conversational way in sort of like language or terms that they would use, rather than us making them interact with guidance which is written in sort of government speak. Yeah, that's I could go talk about this for ages, but that's sort of flavour of the sort of digital inclusion and accessibility angle. And then the second question was about like the single or most impactful moment and project. This will just be based on my own personal experience, I suppose, but I would say that there's some really big political challenges in the UK, Brexit and the pandemic, which both had really significant implications for the provision of digital services in the UK. And I think in those examples, they're like, I think that did prompt or really test, I think, the sort of proposition or the limits of what gov.uk or government digital services could do and how they were operating. In both of those examples, there was a really clear, strong need to join up across government, to share information, to translate complex policy in some instances into things which were practical and actionable for users, and to do that in a more like actively helpful and proactive way. So I think that's really kind of stimulated some of the developments since then around, increasing proactivity, increasing personalization, and some of the early tests that we did of that different sort of user experience, I think, came out of some of the pressures in that time. So in terms of what we do and also how we deliver the work and partner across government, I think that was, for me at least, felt like a really significant moment.
Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation and for your answers. Thank you to everyone who dropped questions or comments in the chat. It was a great discussion, and I'm sure the beginning of many more to come. So we will go on to our next presentation. So I will now hand over to Bailey Reid. Bailey is the head of international at the Government Digital Service, and he'll be talking to us about AI in the public sector. Bailey manages and leads the team delivering the UK's bilateral and multilateral partnerships for digital government. He also represents UK interests at a range of fora, including the World Bank, the UN, and OECD. Over to you, Bailey.
Thank you. Quick question on how am I doing for time stuff? How much do I actually have?
let me see. You have until maybe 11:17.
And that's half, right, between presentation and questions, right?
Yeah, sorry, 12:17. So yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Dun, dun, dun. And can I just get a yay or nay if this is showing?
Yay.
Yes, perfect. Cool. So yes, my name is Bailey, and I run the international unit for government digital service. And so what we're aiming to do here is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what our AI projects and infrastructure and capabilities look like at the moment, and where we're looking to go. So this slide here outlines sort of what is the high-level strategy, what's our ambitions for deploying AI in the public sector. I suspect many of you may well have similar slides or strategies for your own nations. And this is effectively recognizing that artificial intelligence is a new technology, is quite a promising technology, and is one where there's a high level of appetite and demand from ministers, from citizens, that we harness this in order to create efficiencies, better services, and to basically bring government more to the standards that are expected. Part of this is then driven by two wider documents that we've published. One of those is called the Blueprint for Modern Digital Government, which is effectively illustrating this is what we think a good digital government looks like over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. There's also, if you want to see us being quite honest about some of the challenges we face when it comes to deploying digital technologies, a report called the State of Digital Government Report, and that's being quite upfront and honest when it comes to things like the state of our legacy infrastructure, or how difficult it can be to secure the right level of skills and capabilities into government in order to meet the demands that we face. So across that, it's roughly what you would expect. So we're looking to accelerate that adoption. We need to coordinate across the public sector so that people aren't duplicating, so it's all operating on the right sort of tech stacks that enable that effective deployment. That there's actually a clear community of that AI usage so that when people come up with innovative ideas, is actually quickly rolled out, and then trying to identify those opportunities for exploration. Next slide will end up going into slightly more detail across what we actually mean about this in proper terms. So this is what we call the Prime Minister's AI Exemplar Programme. So as Joyty spoke about before, having that senior level buy-in, definitely in the UK context, is critical in terms of getting departments to buy in and do that legwork that enables the scaling and the deployment. The other part, not only just getting the PM's input and support for this that was useful, is it allowed us to distill what are the priorities and what do we consider are the sort of moonshot projects that we're looking to deploy. So this includes, you'll see there, the GovUK chat that she was talking about just earlier, but we're also talking about things that will really minimize the amount of day-to-day sort of, you're just going through the motions, you just need to comply with this in order to create a document or to file it, and actually get people doing more work in that sort of strategic value add parts of their day job. So this is even things like casework. This is things like making civil servants day-to-day more effective, so not spending lots of time writing minutes, but actually doing the actions and the work that citizens expect us to be doing. This also has the added value of being a public document, and therefore also stands as a bit of a call to arms for industry in terms of, if you are able to, as a private sector company, come up with a really effective solution that answers some of these challenges, that's something that UK government's likely to be very interested in, and therefore creates the start of those conversations where people can come up with their solutions, say why it's potentially better what we've got in-house, or potentially better to the competition, and we can have those sort of early discussions and make sure that the UK can be on the front foot in terms of that adoption across the public sector. Next slide here is much more around, firstly, what we're doing to increase that uptake, but also try to make sure that these are all basically public-facing documents. So any of you in your respective countries, if you want to either look at how we're approaching these technologies, but also, you know, other countries can have and do adapt these to their own local contexts and then start deploying that. That is something we support. It's a fairly, most of our products are on GitHub if you want to just deploy them or play around with them and see how we've tackled certain challenges. So the first document there is the AI Playbook for Government. This is specifically targeted at technological users and some of the safeguards and concerns people might have when they're deploying it. So we'll all remember when sort of GPT first came out, and we sort of had to sort of say, well, we need to sort of evaluate these tools. We need to make sure that we understand how it's using the data, how that's feeding back, and that it's appropriate for the levels of sensitivity that government is using. And that's a constantly evolving picture with this technology. So the AI Playbook covers everything from sort of data sensitivities to cyber to what sort of legislation you might need to comply with or think about before you start deploying AI into departments and into your projects. The second one is then looking much more at the digital, or we call the digital economy. And so what is required across the economy, be that levels of compute, energy costs, skills, small to medium enterprises, how they uptake AI, and having a full plan of how we're going to tackle that picture, of which one of those pillars is the public sector, and effectively leading by example and showing, you don't need to be, these are the styles of challenges you can deploy AI. This is how you deploy it responsibly, and then making sure that companies can see that and go, okay, the government's using it. This is the success they've had. Maybe we can consider a similar application for ourselves. The third one there is all about being open to the public, making sure that people don't fear what we're doing with AI, they have good grasp and understanding. So we publish what will be all, we're currently going through the process of uploading all of our use cases. And so that creates openness and trust with the public, but also it means other departments can see different departments' use cases and then start reaching out to go, actually, that's a great tool. We think we could use it as well. Or how did you tackle some of these problems, and create that collaborative environment. And again, that is something that you can just sort of put into your search engine, and you can also see as partners around the world on what the UK is doing, and therefore how some of those use cases might be applicable to you. A lot of them are also open sourced, but in some cases they might not be open source, but we're happy to share, it just depends what level of maturity that product is at. And then the last one is what Dorothy was talking about before, so I won't spend much time on it, but is the UK government service standards. So artificial intelligence is a useful tool. It is one tool of your technological landscape, and therefore shouldn't be divorced from your standards and what you expect for good service. And so our technologists are also guided by what is considered a good transformation. How do you bring in the right teams? How do you solve the whole problem? How do you engage the users, et cetera, in terms of deploying those tools? As part of this broad ecosystem, and this is sort of going from, here's the overview to here are some sort of real world examples of what we're doing. We created something called the Incubator for AI, or I.AI, and that is a team that sits here within GDS, whose job is to either roll out tools that can be used for civil servants across the public sector, or to go into departments who have really promising use cases for AI, but might not necessarily have the teams in their own department, or might need a bit more support in terms of technological expertise to realize those end outcomes. So what does that look like in terms of practice? That can be things from trying to make sure that you get the personalized support you need. So obviously the NHS is a huge healthcare provider for the UK, but that also puts lots of pressure on them. So actually, is there a world in which we can start harnessing AI to get people quick, fast responses that are tailored to them, rather than having to wait for what is a good but sometimes slow process in terms of reaching a doctor and being able to get that advice directly from the NHS? Is there a world in which where you can start auto-filling some of your submissions you need to make to government, let's say for getting a driving license or to get a fishing license or something like that? How do we auto-fill that and make that journey as simple as possible for you? One of the big ones we're looking at, and I'll get into more detail later, but is around planning permissions. It's quite a slow process, has been designed over a number of decades. Quite a lot of our planning infrastructure, you can be looking at documents over 100 years old in some cases in terms of who owns certain land rights, how you need to tackle it. And so simplifying that process is quite an important lever in terms of the economic growth. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be an easy journey. And part of what AI has to deal with is not only the sort of technical side of deploying AI, but also some of the sort of social and more funding side of those challenges. So trying to make sure that people have the risk appetite to try and play around with these tools, that senior leaders understand that it's not going to be a 100% success rate, that sometimes you will need to go back to the drawing board, add additional tooling, or wait for AI to become more mature before making that a full product. Try and make sure that people understand how it works under the hood. Obviously, there's a lot of press and a lot of media around this, but that doesn't mean each individual person understands the sort of risk, the appetite, what they're taking on when they're deploying these, the sort of service aspects of running a live service for these. How do you update it? And then making sure you share those lessons across the board. Definitely, when GPT first came out, lots of departments felt the need to quickly run trials, but that meant there was quite a bit of duplication across the public sector. How does AI tackle those challenges? So because you have a centralized hub that is very close to sort of ministers, number 10 down the street, and to the Prime Minister's office, who are real experts in those fields, it gives them a lot of bandwidth to be trusted by public sector employees and ministers to take those risks. It's specifically given that mandate, and also is given a mandate in terms of things like bringing in talent into government. So we have something called the number 10 Innovation Fellowship, where we're able to take, world-leading scientists or academics and bring them into government for a short period of time and enable that to be deployed. Whereas normally, not sure how it works for your respective governments, but in the UK government, it can be quite a long process to hire people. Quite often you can't pay them the salaries they might be able to get in the private sector. So coming up with bespoke tools that allow you to bring people into government was quite a critical part of getting some of the expertise around. Some examples of the successes we've had. So Consult is a tool that we had effectively whenever you're designing new policy in the UK government, you open it out to consultation. GovUK has been fantastic in making it really easy to respond to government saying we want to change our policy on a free trade agreement. But that also means you get a lot more responses. So I was in the trade department when we did our trade negotiations with Australia, and we had about 150,000 responses to that. You can imagine some poor person having to go through each of those manually. Even if you're spending 10 minutes on each response, that tail spins quite quickly. And so we've created an AI tool that allows AI to go through all of those responses, and you can create bespoke reports very quickly. We've currently got about £200,000 in savings for that. That number is going to go up very quickly as you start using it for large consultations, but also more frequently. Redbox was effectively a bespoke tool, similar in the way Copilot would work, or Gemini would work if those are currently embedded in your functions, and allowed civil servants to get access to those tools much sooner than if we had waited for how procurement processes work to test all of those tools. So it got those tools in civil service hands really quickly. And then Extract was the one I was talking about before, which will be rolled out to local authorities, about basically taking all of the legislation and regulation on what it takes to build out properties or invest into local areas to get that planning permission, and basically streamline both sides of it. So it's easier for people to apply because they can just go through an AI tool and get effectively a good sense of if this is going to get approved or not before they have to apply. And then on the flip side, for local authorities, to have a really good sense of, okay, AI has already gone through some of this, and I just need to review how it's applied legislation and regulation to assume that's going to be correct. This is then going to continue. It's not going to end there. And we're looking at what are the next challenges we're going to tackle. Quite often you'll see the challenges we're tackling are areas where we just can't hire enough experts in that field. So there's a missing area in terms of productivity, or in terms of how much we can scale that. So personal AI tutors, it's never going to be realistic for government to have an individual teacher for every single student in a classroom. But we think it's fantastic, actually, if you could provide a similar level of capability to help people, with their own individualized educational needs. How can government support that? Hospital is another area. It's almost never going to be possible that we can have as many doctors or nurses as we really would want. And so trying to create bespoke tooling that increases the efficiency or the personalized nature of that support is going to be a huge game changer in terms of the NHS and its capabilities. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whistle or / I might skip some of these slides. But part of that is making sure that departments feel comfortable taking on those risks and deploying that quickly, that you have that feedback loop and trying to identify what are going to be the moonshot parts of those equations. But lastly, and I think this is one of the crucial ones, government doesn't have to build everything itself. Some targets will be, we're going to be best off working with some of the frontier labs. Some of them will just be deployed by the private sector and we just purchase it. As having a really good sense of what is that build versus buy decision-making matrix. And that's the end there. I believe there's some time for questions and answers. So I'll jump back to my other screen and I'm around for that.
Thank you so much, Bailey, for that great presentation. It was so interesting to hear about I.AI and the way that tools are improving public services such as Redbox and through the consult team tool that you mentioned. I'll take questions from the chat as well. So to give people a little bit of time to get them down, I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about how you've identified tools that might be of interest to different parts of government. So for example, the planning permission tool, what was the journey to kind of think about that?
Yeah, so there's sort of two main levers. So the first is there's something called a scan unit in I.AI, where effectively anyone from across government can come up to them with their bespoke issues and challenges, and then we sort of store and start to prioritize those. And then the second one is obviously people aren't shy about considering AI. So sometimes we'll just recognize a very politically important challenge and ourselves will go, we think there's a digital role to be played here in terms of simplifying that issue. We'll then rank those across the piece in terms of how complicated is it going to be to roll out the solution, how politically important, how much money might it save, how much economic growth might it add to the UK economy. And across those, you start weighing those up, and then you can come up with a number at the end that effectively goes, this would be really easy to do, but won't save much money, or this would be really difficult to do, but is really impactful. And across those, you start prioritizing. It then goes into your sort of build phase where you start actually deploying AI at some of those challenges, and you can see how effective it's been. And then sometimes it will be successful and you'll go into what we call the scale phase, which is where Extract is at the moment. Or sometimes it might be less successful and we go, actually, AI is just not ready for whatever reason and to put back in the box. Or the third case is sometimes we build it and that gives us a really good understanding of how it works. And then we can go to the private sector and really evaluate their solutions and work out which ones we're going to procure. So building Redbox really helps us in terms of working out, great, which do we think is better for civil servants, Claude, Gemini, Copilot? Like there's so many options. We need to have really good evaluation metrics to decide what we deploy.
Thank you, Bailey, for that answer. So just to come to some questions, we've got a lot of questions in the chat asking about where people can find the documents that you opened the presentation with. And then a question from Eleanor Sarpong asking if the AI tools are built on open source.
Yeah. So the first one is they're all on gov.uk. If someone from CTO wants to ask me afterwards, I can just give you direct links, or you can just put them in your search engine and you'll find them quite quickly. Slightly different answer to the open sources. So in terms of open source products, some are already relatively mature and therefore fully on GitHub. So things like the design standards that Joyce was talking about before. Or we've got an AI tool called Minute, which basically allows you to put your phone in the middle of the room, have a conversation, and it does the full readout for you. That's on GitHub as well. So you search GitHub i.ai and you see some of their tools. Again, if people have particular interests, I can supply links. Some of these, however, are still experimental, have not been fully deployed, and therefore aren't quite on GitHub yet. So Extract, I don't think they're currently uploaded onto GitHub, but the intention will be eventually it is. But obviously, while we're still playing around with it constantly, it's not quite there yet.
Thank you, Bailey. So I've got a question from Kenneth. He asks, any ideas about the potential social changes AI brings beyond what we are currently experiencing? And then a question from Huawa. Do you have any advice? Do you advise that governments put in place a central digital infrastructure for the public sector before the ambitions on AI, or can it go hand in hand?
Yeah. I'm going to answer the last one first, and if you remind me some of the others, it's probably best to do one by one. Otherwise, I'm going to start answering something and forget the others. But the last one in terms of the infrastructure. So the UK government is a cloud-first environment, and not every department uses the same cloud infrastructure. So some use, for AWS, some use their old on-prem systems, some use Oracle services, etc., etc. So we've got quite a broad infrastructure, and some of this is what we call legacy technology. So we set this up in the 90s. We know we need to replace it, but that's a long journey, and that does inhibit your ability to deploy AI fully. So if you've still got some data center that's still using on-premises and that you're having to manually upkeep, it's unlikely that's going to have the throughput which the GPU compute powers to fully deploy AI. So some of those will be a limiter to your abilities. However, our experience has been work at the level that you can deploy it now. Citizens will want to see the results now. There'll be economic savings, and that might even allow you to fix some of those legacy issues faster. So we do still have, cobalt coding environments, but actually being able to use tools like Cursor is an AI coding assistant, which therefore allows you to remediate that legacy technology at a faster rate than you otherwise would have been. So those aren't necessarily logically distinct issues. One of the other ones I remember was sort of wider social changes. So the answer is yes, but not necessarily within GDS. So GDS's role is public sector deployment, and therefore we're very concerned around, where are there supply limitations or efficiency gains to be made by deploying AI? There's another part of the department which we call the AI Opportunities Unit, and that will be where some of those wider social changes will be considered. So, for instance, they'll be doing work around how we encourage SMEs to uptake this in a way that we're not. And then there's obviously the really long-term pictures, which is, is there a world in which AI is doing so much work that actually do we need to, potentially move to different ways of working or different ways of supporting citizens into new jobs and environments? So Department for Education and Department for Work and Pensions is looking at that longer-term skills picture. And then the other unit to talk about is our AI Security Institute, which is talking about what are effectively new problems or even potentially crimes that exist now in a way that they probably wouldn't because of AI, and then working with frontier labs to limit that. So we don't particularly want it to be possible for you just to go, hey, AI, please order me all the components I need to to build a bomb and how to do it to my house. Thank you very much. And so working with those frontier labs to make sure that those sort of capabilities aren't democratized and then put into the general public, because that would obviously be a safety concern.
Thank you, Bailey. So there's a question about, I might combine this with another one. So kind of about safeguarding critical thinking in the era of AI. And I think this kind of links to the question we had about digital inclusion and how, as we're increasing capability, we're ensuring that everyone can access this with the level of digital skills that they have.
Yeah, and that's where sometimes AI would be both the cause of the challenge, but also potentially the solution. So when talking about things like an AI personalized tutor, that is a world in which you can actually upskill yourself by having not someone, but effectively an agent through that AI tool that can work through and help upskill you. We are currently developing and starting to change how we sort of upskill even in our educational system. So like back down at school when you're like 8 or 9 years old, starting to input into the curriculum things like how do you spot a deepfake AI solution, and trying to make sure that the future generations are as well equipped as humanly possible to, yes, use these tools in a way that will make them succeed in the new economy, but also in such a way that they're aware of the dangers and aren't, susceptible to manipulation through some of these technologies, because we are aware that's possible and something we need to guard both our general public but also new generations against.
Thank you, Bailey. We have time for, I think, one more question. If anyone wants to drop one in the chat, if not, I will take the opportunity to ask the question myself. So I will give it a minute. Okay. So I was just interested in the way in which GDS works with the private sector and also other stakeholders like civil society and academia.
Yeah, so we are in the works and eventually should hopefully have one, which is like a build versus buy strategy, and we're never going to get it perfectly right. So sometimes we will build a thing that the private sector then offers, and then you should get the private sector solution, so you didn't necessarily have to build it yourself. And the flip side is there'll probably be times where we thought the private sector would supply something and actually it turned out it wasn't quite right for us, so we need to build it in-house. Like, that is going to exist. Having very close relationships with those private sector companies we find is fairly crucial. It's not always the case that public sector teams within the major sort of hyperscalers will be aware of how government works or how our infrastructure landscape looks like and the challenges we face. And so keeping that dialogue open, frequent, and really engaged is important. If anybody comes to GDS's offices, it's in the same part of London where, for instance, AWS's offices are or Salesforce's offices are. We have quite a close relationship with those major suppliers. When it comes to civil society, academia, working with things like Tech UK and some of the more emerging parts of the market is really quite important. And we do have AI advisory boards and panels, which includes things like civil society, includes things like academia, because obviously private sector is great in terms of supplying it, but they are a business, right? They're trying to sell you a product. So working with people who can safeguard, assure, and ask the right questions is also really important on that side of the fence as well. So making sure you're engaged as much as humanly possible. Government can sometimes look like a closed door. Part of what GDS and DSIT does as a whole is try to really open that up and say, no, we're happy to have the conversation. It's important. And then if there are problems on the back end, if some departments need some more conversations, we can then come up as, we're the digital experts, it's fine. Let's have that conversation and be more of the trusted partner if there are problems that need to be troubleshooted.
Thank you so much for your presentation and also for your thoughtful answers to this question. These questions, and thank you to everyone who posed a question. So we've come to the end of our two presentations. I just want to say a big thank you to Joyty and Bailey, and to those who asked questions, and to the Secretary General and her team for organising this fantastic event. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought and things to think about. We've had a really good discussion today. I was particularly interested to hear about changing user preferences and the ways in which gov.uk have built trust with users. Also, the different ways AI can be used to improve public services. I think this exchange really highlights the importance of us as a Commonwealth, as Commonwealth countries coming together and sharing our experiences. And I really hope that we can continue to find more opportunities for discussions like this in the future. So once again, thank you for your participation and thank you for the invite to present. And I'll now hand over to Leonard for the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Commonwealth members, esteemed partners, colleagues and friends, it's truly been a pleasure, spending some time with you today, exploring some of the UK's most impactful digital transformation initiatives. On behalf of the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization, I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to the UK Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and to our expert presenters. Thank you for generously sharing the UK's experience in creating secure, inclusive, and citizen-centered digital government. The case studies and demonstrations we've seen today clearly illustrates that what is possible when it illustrates what is possible when leadership, policy, innovation align together. When governments are bold to rethink how services are designed and who they're designed for. One of the key takeaways out of this session today is political leadership, and buying from the political class is important for digital transformation. At the CTO, we firmly believe that digital transformation is not simply about technology. It is about people and ensuring that every citizen in every corner of the Commonwealth has access to meaningful digital opportunities. The insights shared today will undoubtedly support our member countries in accelerating their own national digital strategies and in shaping solutions that reflect local realities while learning from global best practices. We invite all of you to stay connected with the CTO through our digital channels and to actively engage in our capacity building initiatives, including capacity building for development impact, CBDI program, which is designed to support practical skills developed for digital government. Thank you once again to all presenters, partners, and participants. Your presence and contributions have made this event a success. We look forward to advancing this journey together, ensuring that digital transformation delivers prosperity, resilience, opportunity for every Commonwealth citizen. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone again. I guess that is the end of the session for today. So enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you.